Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to try to tackle something I'm sure you've heard a lot about recently. Political polarization in America.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it seems like everyone's talking about this divided America.
Right.
But you've sent in some really fascinating research on the psychology behind all of this. And you know what?
What's that?
It turns out we might not be as divided as we think. By the end of this deep dive, you'll have a new understanding of what's really going on and maybe even some new ways to approach those tricky conversations with people across the political aisle.
You know what's so fascinating? This research,
Yeah.
especially the stuff from Beyond Conflict,
Okay.
it highlights this thing they call the perception gap.
Okay, so let's unpack that.
Okay.
What exactly is a perception gap?
Well, it's basically the difference between how we think the other side feels
Right.
and how they actually feel.
Okay.
And you might be shocked to learn that Americans consistently overestimate how much the other side dislikes them or disagrees with them,
Right.
or even dehumanizes them.
So we're basically imagining things are way worse than they are.
Exactly. There was this one study
Yeah.
that found that Democrats thought Republicans would rate their warmth at a freezing 28 out of 100.
Oh, wow.
But in reality, Republicans gave them an 83.
Wow. That is a big difference.
It's huge.
It's like bracing yourself for a slap in the face and getting a hug instead.
Yeah. And this misperception itself can fuel further division.
Right.
Like if you think someone is hostile toward you,
Yeah.
you're less likely to really want to engage with them in conversation.
Yeah, you just want to stay away.
Exactly. And then that just reinforces the divide even more.
It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. We create the division that we fear.
Exactly. And this also ties into the fact that for a lot of people,
Uh-huh.
political allegiance isn't really about a deep understanding of policies or anything,
Yeah.
but it's more about group identity.
It's like rooting for your favorite sports team.
Yes.
You might not know all the players or even understand all the rules, but you're wearing the jersey, you're cheering with the crowd because it's about belonging to that group.
That's such a good analogy.
Thanks.
And this is where Keith Payne's book comes in, Good, Reasonable People.
Okay.
He brings in this idea of moral luck.
Moral luck. Okay, now that sounds really intriguing. Tell me more.
So moral luck is this idea that our political leanings are influenced by all these different factors that were already present even before we were born.
Wow.
Like, think about it. Where
Yeah.
you grew up, your family's background, all these things can have a huge impact.
So you're saying my political views might be influenced by things that happened before I was even born?
It's wild, right?
Yeah, that's pretty mind-blowing.
Yeah, and Payne, he uses some really striking examples to illustrate this point.
Okay.
For instance, there are counties that relied heavily on slavery back in 1860.
Wow.
And those counties still show really predictable political leanings among white residents today. Yeah, it's crazy. It suggests that history can actually echo through generations and can even influence our modern political landscape.
Wow. It's like a domino effect rippling through time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So understanding this historical context can be a powerful lens
Yeah.
for understanding our current political dynamics.
Right.
Now, let's zoom in on the individual psyche a little bit.
Okay.
You sent in some research about this thing called the psychological immune system.
Yes.
And I think this is where things get really interesting.
Okay. So what exactly is this psychological immune system? It sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie.
Well, think of it as kind of like your brain's defense system.
Okay.
We all have all these mental mechanisms that protect our sense of self and belonging.
So like when you buy that fancy new coffee maker,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and then you see all these negative reviews online and then your mind starts justifying the purchase just so you don't have to feel like you made a bad decision.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
We do the same thing with our political beliefs. Oh, yeah, we cling to information that confirms our views, and we just dismiss anything that challenges those views.
So we basically build these mental walls around our beliefs.
Yeah, and that's what we call motivated reasoning.
Motivated reasoning.
And then its partner in crime is this thing called confirmation bias. And that's where we seek out sources that only echo our existing beliefs. It creates these echo chambers and makes it harder to see other perspectives.
It's like we're trapped in our own little information bubbles, only hearing what we want to hear.
Exactly. And this psychological immune system, it plays a big role in how we approach political conversations and makes us less receptive to different viewpoints.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So it's like this big cycle. We have these pre-existing beliefs, and then we look for information that confirms them.
Exactly.
And then that just strengthens those beliefs even more.
Exactly. And then it makes it even harder to have those productive conversations with people who see things differently.
Right, because we're not even open to hearing what they have to say.
Right. We've already got our defenses up.
Yeah, and this is all happening on a subconscious level most of the time.
A lot of the time, we don't even realize we're doing it.
It's like our brains are wired to protect us from information that might challenge our worldview.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it?
It is. And it's also kind of scary when you think about it.
I know, right?
Because if we're not even aware of our own biases,
Yeah.
how can we ever hope to bridge this divide?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is. So how do we break out of these echo chambers? How do we start to see the world through someone else's eyes?
Well, that's what we're going to dive into next.
Okay, I'm ready.
Me too.
Let's do it. So we've got this historical baggage and this group identity and all these mental defense mechanisms all kind of swirling around in the mix. But it's not just our own individual psychology at play here, right?
Right.
What about the impact of economic inequality?
Oh, yeah.
That feels like a huge piece of the puzzle.
Absolutely. Rising economic inequality just throws fuel on the fire of polarization.
Right.
It makes people cling even tighter to their position on the economic ladder, and they try to justify why they are where they are.
Interesting.
And Payne's research even found that people in higher income brackets often still don't feel like they've made it.
Really?
Yeah.
Even when they're objectively well off.
Yeah, they're always comparing themselves to people who are even better off.
So it's not a simple haves versus have-nots situation.
Right.
It's more about this feeling of never having enough.
Exactly. That persistent sense of scarcity, it can spark resentment and competition.
Yeah.
And it makes it even harder to find common ground across economic divides.
Right, because if you're always focused on what you don't have, you're less likely to see what you do have in common with other people.
Right. And this feeling of scarcity can even get tied up with our group identities. So then economic anxieties become part of this us versus them narrative, which adds yet another layer to the polarization.
Okay, this is all pretty intense stuff. It's starting to feel like we're caught in this web of historical forces and psychological biases and economic pressures, all kind of pulling us further and further apart.
Yeah.
So the big question is,
What's that?
is there any way out of this mess? Can we actually do anything to bridge this divide?
Well, Payne does offer a little glimmer of hope.
Yeah, I'm listening.
Instead of just getting stuck in the weeds of specific arguments, he suggests that we try to focus on understanding the motivations behind someone's political beliefs.
Okay, so what does that mean?
Well, like, what are their underlying fears or their values or their experiences that are shaping how they see things?
So it's less about winning the argument
Right.
and more about really trying to understand where the other person is coming from.
Exactly. And remember that psychological immune system we were talking about?
Yeah.
Well, if we go into these conversations aware of those defenses, we might actually be able to break through a little bit. It's about creating a space where people feel heard and respected, even when you don't agree with their views.
So the next time I'm tempted to get into that heated political debate online, maybe I should take a breath and try to see the person on the other side as well. A person.
Yeah.
Someone who's just trying to make sense of the world just like me.
Exactly. I think that's a great takeaway. It's about recognizing our shared humanity, even in the midst of all of our differences.
Yeah.
And, research shows that simply listening to someone's personal experiences can be way more persuasive than just like hitting them with all these facts and figures.
That makes sense because a personal story, it kind of connects with us on an emotional level.
Yeah.
In a way that cold, hard data often can't.
Right.
But how do we even start these conversations?
Right.
It feels like everyone is so dug into their own trenches these days that it's almost impossible to have a civil conversation about anything.
Yeah, that's true. It is a challenge, but one strategy is to start by just finding some common ground. Even if it's just like small areas of agreement.
Like what?
Well, maybe you both care about protecting the environment or improving education or supporting local businesses. Starting with shared values like that, it can lay the foundation for a more productive dialogue.
So finding that common ground that us, even when it feels like everything is about them.
Exactly.
Okay, that's a good point. But let's be real here.
Yeah.
There are some issues where it feels like there's just no middle ground whatsoever.
Yeah.
What about those situations?
Those are definitely the toughest conversations to have, and I don't really have a magic formula for those.
Okay.
But even in those cases, it's important to remember that people's political beliefs are often deeply connected with their personal values and their sense of identity.
So if you attack their beliefs,
Yeah.
it's like you're attacking them.
Yeah, in a way, yes. It triggers all those psychological defenses that we were talking about and makes it even harder to have a productive conversation.
So instead of trying to win the argument, the goal should be to just try to understand the other person's perspective, even if we don't agree with it.
Exactly. It's about fostering empathy and respect.
Okay.
Even when we disagree. And,
Yeah,
who knows, you might even learn something new in the process.
that's true. It's a tall order for sure,
It is.
but it feels like a worthwhile goal to strive for.
Yeah.
After all, if we can't even talk to each other,
Right.
how are we supposed to even begin to solve all the complex problems that are facing our society?
I couldn't agree more. It's important to remember that this polarization didn't happen overnight. It's been building for decades, shaped by historical forces and economic shifts, and even the evolution of media.
Yeah, that historical domino effect you mentioned earlier, it really puts things in perspective. It's like the past is still shaping our present in so many ways.
It is. It reminds us that reversing this trend isn't going to be easy, or quick. It's going to take a lot of consistent effort, both individually and as a society.
So we're in it for the long haul.
Yeah.
No quick fixes here.
Yep.
But what can we as individuals do to start chipping away at this divide?
Well, one thing we can do is just be more mindful of our own biases.
Okay.
We all have them.
Right.
But becoming aware of them can help us challenge our own assumptions and be more open to different perspectives.
So it starts with looking inward before we try to change anyone else's mind.
Absolutely. And it's also about being willing to engage in those tough conversations, even if they're uncomfortable. Avoiding them only makes that divide deeper.
I'm starting to realize that bridging this divide isn't about these grand gestures or anything.
Right.
It's about those small everyday interactions with people.
I think you're right. It's about changing how we approach these conversations, one interaction at a time.
So shifting the focus from winning to understanding, them to us, from division to connection. It's easier said than done, but it feels like a goal worth striving for.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it all starts with recognizing that even in those really heated debates, most people are coming from a place of good intentions.
Right.
They genuinely believe that their views are right, just like we believe ours are.
Right. And those deeply held beliefs are often rooted in their own personal experiences.
Yeah.
Their values, their whole understanding of the world.
Exactly. So instead of just assuming the worst about people who have different political views, let's try approaching them with a little more curiosity and a little more empathy.
Okay.
Maybe even ask ourselves, what kind of life experiences might have led this person to this perspective?
That's a powerful shift in thinking.
Yeah.
From judgment to curiosity.
It is, and it's a shift that can open up all these new possibilities for dialogue and understanding.
Right. It's not about erasing our differences or anything.
Right.
It's about finding ways to bridge them.
Exactly.
This has been a really incredible deep dive.
It has.
It feels like we peeled back the layers of this whole divided America narrative.
Yeah.
And found some really surprising truths about the psychology that's at play.
Yeah, and hopefully our listeners are walking away with a fresh perspective on this whole idea of political polarization.
Yeah, and remember, we might be less divided than we think.
That's right.
But our perceptions and all those deep-seated psychological defenses can keep us apart.
They really can.
So the next time you encounter someone with opposing political views, just take a moment to consider why they might hold those beliefs.
Yeah.
What life experiences or group affiliations might be shaping their perspective.
And remember that historical domino effect we talked about.
Yeah.
It might make you look at your own political beliefs in a whole new light.
That's something to think about for sure. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into political polarization.
Yeah. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those conversations going.